Tomaso Duso. Welcome to Digital Markets Research Hub. Thank you for your availability. And I wanted to start with you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much, Oles. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure and honor. So let me start telling a bit about myself. So I'm Italian. I studied in Venice, my undergraduate, and I mention it because that is where for the first time I get in touch with data. It was my master thesis. I was looking at consumption patterns of Italian households. It has nothing to do with what I am doing now, but it really fascinated me, and that was one of the most important experience I had in my career, because it helped me to do the things that I do today in the way I do them today, which is looking at data, trying to find facts, and based on these facts, then think about what we can do in terms of policy. Then I moved to Berlin. I almost accidentally, because I moved for a personal reason, I started a PhD here, and I was very lucky to meet in my first year Lars-Henrik Röller, who became my advisor, and I took this class in Empirical Industrial Organization, where for the first time I discovered really how important markets and competition is. So Henrik Röller, by the way, then became the first chief economist at DG Comp, and he was the one who really taught me to love competition policy and regulation. And during my PhD, I worked more on regulation, on the political economy of regulation in telecommunications, but also started working on my first research on merger control. Then from there, I moved to Vienna, where I stayed only 1 year in this fantastic economics department. I stayed only 1 year because Henrik asked me to go back to Berlin, which I did. He had this very nice group of young people working on industrial organization, competition issue, but also people working on behavioral economics. So Paul Haidus was there at that time, who has become really a leading researcher in behavioral economics and competition policy. And in that period is where I really started working more and more on the key topic of my research, that is merger, partly with Henrik, partly with other co-authors. And it's also the time where I started doing my first policy projects, mostly with a small economic consulting in Rome, Lea. And if I think back, it was 2005, I think, we had this first big project for DG Competition, where we set a framework for the ex-post evaluation of merger control. At that time, very few people talked about this. And so I think that was, again, ex-post, one of those moments where I really think that it was a fundamental change in my career, because it was the first time that I saw how all these things come together. So the methodological side, working with data and econometrics, the topic part of the story, so thinking about how important competition and competition policy are, and then doing that not just as a research paper, so using the methods for research to do policy advice, to write something that could have an impact in the way policymakers behave. So that is something that I started there, and that is now the core of my approach to what I do here at the DIW Berlin. Before I came to the DIW, I got my first professorship at DICE, which is also a fantastic institution. It was at the very beginning, a very young faculty. We all knew each other, all people working on competition issues. and probably the largest industrial organization competition faculty in Germany. So I wanted to stay there, but then I got an offer to come back to Berlin. As you said, I can never leave this city. And then I started at the DIW. And the DIW is a research center that is doing basic research, but also a lot of this policy consulting, institutional consulting. So over the last 10 years, I create this group of people, mostly working empirically at the interface between competition and industrial policy, doing research, trying to publish very well, and at the same time doing projects, mostly for the European Commission, DG competition, but also for the ministries and also some competition authorities. So that is the story of my life in the last 20 years and why I came here. Maybe a last point that is related to also why maybe I have been nominated 2 years ago to be member of the Monopolies Commission. So a part of this is my experience. So there are not many people that are really very much interested both in research and policy in the area of competition, which is the kind of people that the Monopolies Commission needs. But probably it's also my normative view on competition as a key principle of the functioning of democratic societies. And we can talk more about that later on if you want. But that is also the moral compass maybe of this institution that is now 50 years old and that is seen informally as the competition lobby in Germany. So it's a commission that advises the government on all these issues of competition and really making sure that competition is seen as an important principle, and competition works for the benefits of consumers, but of the society as a whole, more in general.
Thank you very much, Tomaso. You mentioned quite a few issues which, in my view, require, and I would be grateful for discussing them in more detail, namely your perspectives on merger, on the situation with merger control, also on your experience with Monopolies Commission, German Monopolies Commission, some other things which you have mentioned, competition as a principle of liberal democracy or democratic society. These are very important, but maybe we can start with, in order to be more systematic, so to say, with your kind of diagnosis or description of the state of affair of competition policy over the last, maybe not turbulent, but significantly reshuffling years, let's say last decade or so.
Yes, I am a big fan of EU competition policy. I think DG Comp has done a lot of things right over the past 50 years, but also over the last 10 years. I think without DG competition, we would not have the imperfect but existing single market that is so crucial for the benefit of Europe and European citizens, right? So I think the way DG Comp protected competition and push for reinforcing and creating the single market has been really central, right? So, and by the way, we saw it yesterday, the European Court of Justice making two really very important decisions supporting the work of DG Comp in areas where DG Comp tried to be a bit bolder than usual. But because they really thought it was an area where we really need to be careful that competition is not negatively affected by the behavior of some very powerful firms. So that is the first part. But we know nobody is perfect, and DG Comp is surely not perfect. and that is also related to what I said before. That is why I think that seriously ex post evaluating the work that everybody is doing, but in particular policymakers are doing, is so important. Because we know that we make mistakes, and then we have to learn which mistakes we made in order to become better. And I think DG Competition, although having very good records, made mistakes. And I mean, it's not just I think it. I did my research over 30 years evaluating European merger controls. And already my first paper on European merger controls, together with Hendrik Röller and Damien Neven, who was then also the second chief economist at this DG Competition, we first collected data on the decision of DG Competition by reading all these reports and collecting data from the reports, and then using this data in an econometric analysis to assess whether the competition was making mistakes and what was the driver of these mistakes. And what we show is that with this data, and of course one can discuss about how we did that work, but I think it was a compelling evidence that the Commission made both type 1 and type 2 errors, right? We try to understand where it comes from. The paper was on the political economy of European merger control. So we thought lobbying by firms is a very important driver. We didn't find very much evidence for that, maybe also because the sample was very small, but we saw how important procedural issues are for the frequency of type 1 and type 2 errors. The country of origin of the merging firms was very important. The industry of origin of the merging firms was very important. So, and that already gave us some ideas what did possibly go wrong, which then helps understand what one could do to improve things. And I was obsessed with this. So one of the first things I did when I came to the DIW was to say, now that I am the head of this department and I have a bit more resources, I scale up this project. So we read every single, so we had a team that read every single of almost 6,500 decisions of DigiComp and created a database of over 40,000 product and geographic markets, right? And then using a mix of econometrics and theoretical ideas, we developed a way of assessing the decision of the Commission on these mergers. And what we find, and that is a paper that has been out for a while, we revise it, and so I would be happy if the reader then in a couple of months will click on my webpage and download the new version, because what we find is that actually the Commission, again, made many right decisions, but they also made many mistakes. And what we find is that they made much more type 2 mistakes than type 1 mistakes. Which means, so type 2 errors is the Commission being too lenient in clearing potentially anti-competitive mergers. And that is something that I think is super relevant for the discussion we are having in these very turbulent days, where many people call for a relaxation of EU merger control. So what we say from our research is actually, if anything, European merger control should be enforced much more fiercely, right? And I think that this is very important also because European so merger control in general is a very peculiar tool in competition policy. If we get it wrong and allow anti-competitive merger and allow dominant position to be developed in the market, to intervene ex post and constrain the behavior of these dominant firms is very difficult. And also there, I didn't do a lot of research, but I think there is quite a good sense and also quite some empirical evidence that also there, if anything, antitrust authority, and in particular the Commission, has not be too tough And there are many reasons why, and one reason is it's difficult to identify this anti-competitive behavior. It takes ages, right? So the Google shopping case has been decided many years ago, and then there was a decision, and then the firms went to the court, and now it's 8 years after the conduct was identified the first time, and the market moved on, right? And the remedies, yeah, maybe they worked a bit in that case, but actually in the meantime, Google and other dominant firms did similar things or different things in many other different markets. And I think that exactly this sense of what happened in this dimension is what led policymakers to think that competition policy, especially in markets that are so complicated and so quickly developing like digital markets, and ex post competition control, so competition policy is not enough, and then we move to the DMA, so an ex-ante regulation. And I think it, especially in that case, makes a lot of sense. So all in all, I think Digicom made a great job, but nobody's perfect, and if anything, so they fail in not being tough enough.
How do people from the GComp accept your kind of diagnosis maybe, and what type of treatment do you propose, and accidentally also maybe your reflection on the Illumina Grail judgment, or how impactful this judgment will be in shaping the contours of European merger control?
Many questions, Ole. So first of all, I think I mean, I have a very good relationship with DigiComp. I have done a lot of studies for them. I am very close discussion. They know what I think. Sometimes they like it, sometimes a bit less. But they are open. Actually, DigiComp is one of those antitrust authorities that started making more use of ex post evaluations compared to other antitrust authorities. I mean, I would not put them at the same level as the CMA. So the CMA is really fantastic because they are much more open to accept that they made mistake and learn from the mistake and change. For DigiComp, it's more difficult, I think, because it's a larger bureaucratic entity, and maybe there's also a connection to the Illumina Grail. They know that they have more constraints. So to change European competition law is much more difficult than to change competition law in a member state, in the UK or in Germany, right? So, and that is why the Commission started using Article 22 in the way they use it in the Illumina Grail case, because everybody knew that to try to modify the EU merger regulation would have been politically not really feasible. So they tried to go to the boundary of the law, and admittedly, they went out of the boundary in the sense that they stretched the interpretation of Article 22 a bit too much. Actually, the Monopolies Commission was also critical of that, because, I mean, there is a cost to doing that. I mean, I am a big fan of stretching the tools you have as much as you can, but there is also a cost of reducing legal certainty, right? So I have no problem if a member state refer a merger to the Commission if they have jurisdiction of that case. But it is indeed problematic if a member state refer to the Commission a merger for which they don't have jurisdiction, right? So you ask how impactful that will be. I think maybe less than one would expect, So many member states already updated their competition law to make more possible to catch that small fishes, right? So Germany did it, Austria did it, some other countries did it. So in many countries, it's now clear that they can find out with very small mergers that some are concerned they could be killer's acquisition, and then they could refer it under Article 22 to the Commission. So that is a possibility. The other possibility, which is more difficult, but which I, at the end, would really prefer, would be to change the EU merger regulation. I think that transaction threshold for mergers makes a lot of sense. I know that Olivier Gasson doesn't like it too much because it implies much more work. I'm not sure that implies much more work. So if with a new commission, people will start touching the merger regulation, and there are many voices that want to do it for very different purposes. So my hope is that the voices that are there to make competition policy and merger control more effective will then rise and try to make this modification of the merger regulation to make EU merger control able to address also this kind of concentrations of mergers, right? So,
And we have, oh, sorry, go on.
no, it's yeah.
Yeah, we had recently a paper published by stellar legal academics proposing one of the solutions that one act can, the fact that it has been adopted unanimously doesn't necessarily mean that the amendments could not be brought using the qualified majority, which is quite quite proactive, also juristic thinking by stellar people, of course.
Yeah, I mean, that would be great. I think actually, so and maybe we come later on to that. So that is also something that I found very positive from the Draghi report. I mean, we are in a new world, right? So I think Europe should start thinking to update and modify the institutional background. So we cannot go on to have all decision as unanimous decision. Sometimes it's perfectly fine to have a majority decision also in questions like fundamental laws like competition laws, right? So, I mean, member states do this. Germany has updated its competition law twice in the last few years, exactly to address issues that are particularly relevant and new, and where people understood that the current tools are not enough to address all these potential concerns, right? So I think Europe should also do that.
A question caveat, which I think would be helpful for us to understand better your vision about the new industrial policy discussions and the correlation between competition and industrial policy. And this caveat question concerns kind of epistemology, industrial organization. We had a kind of almost religious trust in the objectivity of knowledge, almost kind of this natural, the law of nature, causality and objective, not objectivity in the sense of unbiased, but objectivity in the sense of causal effect, like axiomatic perception or formulaic perception of things. If you are capable to unravel the labyrinth of reality using IO, then you are presenting the truth, however complicated the reality is. So I wanted to double check with you, based on the latest kind of discussions about the existence of several pluralistic, simultaneously true answers to societal problems, based on the recent trend of demathematization, so to say. How objective, again, in this second sense of the word objective, leaving aside any potential susceptibility to manipulation or instrumentalization, we leave it obviously without comments. What are your kind of academic views and sincere belief in the discoverability of the facts, particularly if you talk about significant database collected over a significant period of time with thousands of entries? How confident you as a researcher are in the data which you are discovering together with your team, in yourself, so to say?
So this is a very broad and philosophical question. I am an applied econometrician, so that is and a competition economist. So I really believe in the power of data, right? But I also know exactly what are the limits of the instrument we have to analyze data, especially because data are the representation of a very complex reality, right? So we never really know what the data generation process is, right? So we try to have a model of what could have generated the data, and then try to understand through the data the characteristic of this model, and then make prediction about what could happen if, right? So that is the way we work. So although knowing the limitation both of the models and the analysis of the data, I would never give up carefully modeling and thinking economics, behavior and realities, and trying to measure them as much as you can, right? So I think it's super important because otherwise we could tell stories, right? So and there are many stories that sound plausible, right? So that would be my first answer. I mean, we need this way of think structurally about what could have generated the situation that we are observing, right? So having said that, of course, in some markets it's easier than in others to have a very precise modeling on how firms behave, how consumer react, and in some markets this modeling is very cumbersome. Do we have a dynamic view of what is happening? Should we care more about, sorry, we have a static view, or should we care more about the dynamics? Are consumer completely rational or not? So especially in digital markets, the standard IO models that assume that consumers are rational may be a bit misleading, because we know that many of the potentially anti-competitive effects that we observe might be driven by the fact that consumers have behavioral biases. People stick to the app that is pre-installed, right? So although they know that maybe that is not the best, right? But so in that sense, I think we should continue using sound economic theory and data, and we should continuously update this using the newest tool, being open to add from other disciplines, and honestly, in many cases, that is what we have seen. I mean, especially in digital. So what happened in the past 5 years has been incredible. I mean, it seems we are in two different worlds. So the openness to that antitrust authority had to new theories of harm, to new concept, the desire they had to learn about different ways to model the behavior of the firms in order to really understand what is going on in that specific market has been great, has been relatively slow, but also led to a very different application of competition policy or merger control, if you think, in the last 1.5 years. I mean, for 15 years, we had none of the mergers in the digital sphere that was not even blocked, but not even remedied. And in the last 2 years, there were several mergers blocked, others were withdrawn, others were cleared with remedies, right? So, and I think this change in mind was also driven by the fact that the authorities were very open to import new tools and new understanding on how these markets work from, say, the academia.
Let us now move from industrial organization to industrial policy. And here we have another delicate issue, so to say, yeah, because you have two extremes, and just to identify them in order to depict the field, the one would be kind of industrial policy vulgaris, where you select, perceived as vulgaris, let's say, or radical, where you select the winners, cherry pick industrial champions, and somehow offer them different types of steroids in order to increase, to scale them up for good or bad reasons. And another extreme would be so it's still considered as vulgaris. And another extreme is kind of, yes, we have to reconcile or de-antagonize industrial policy with competition policy, but let us just use an elegant sophism and say that, well, more competition means pro-industrial policy, and we just continue doing competition policy as we did, implying that in the long run it will contribute to industrial policy. So it's somehow, one is kind of an attempt to cut all the established connections and the tradition, intellectual tradition, regulatory tradition. And another extreme would be just an attempt to say, okay, we got the new vocabulary, but we'll continue doing what we are doing, using the industrial policy as a kind of as a nice buzzword, which is trendy these days. There are many different mid positions, so to say. Can you please highlight which of these positions in between appears to be most useful, most necessary for Europe, and most suitable in your view?
My view is that, and it's not only my view, I think it's a view where many people are converging, is that industrial policy and competition policy and regulation and climate policy and trade policy are complementary. They are not substitutable. We need both, right? They complement each other. There are things that we can reach with industrial policy and not with competition policy, and vice versa. And but we should try to make these two policies, especially these two policies, but also others, speak to each other, right? I mean, it would be completely crazy to say we don't need industrial policy. We have a huge twin transformation that we have to manage to overcome. So the digital transformation, the climate transformation, is something that creates so many externalities that we cannot hope that the actors in the economy can manage to do this transformation alone. There are plenty of reasons why the state should support this transformation. And at the same time, there are many ways of doing that. And there is where I think that competition policy, industrial policy are complement. So I think that a good industrial policy should have two elements. It should be, and these two elements are related to competition. So it should be designed in a way that simulate a competitive mechanisms. right? So if we have an objective that is a political objective, that is what we want to reach with industrial policy, and it's super important to have it clearly stated, understand what we want to reach, then industrial policy should be designed to reach this in the most efficient and most effective way. And we know that markets are very good in reaching efficiency. So one can try to design the mechanism through which the state gives the support to the firms or to economy to make this transformation in a way that that is not picking the winner, but trying to make firms compete for this support so that the best will win and will achieve that particular goal in the best way. That is one part, so how to design the policy. And the other one is also to design the policy always thinking about the implication it has. So we might have an objective that that is very specific, like we want to reduce CO2 emission. So we design a policy, but we always should think about the implication that that might have on competition, and then think about what in the market that is affected by that particular policy, and then think about conditions that we can attach to this intervention that help maintain competition exposed in that market that has been held. I give you an example to be very concrete. That is something that we have learned to do very well when we subsidize infrastructure, right? So for broadband subsidy, for instance, the Commission imposed the obligation that any member state that gives subsidies to build up broadband infrastructure should then impose an open access obligation on this infrastructure, which means if I as a firm get money to build broadband in municipalities, then because I build the broadband partly with public money, I am obliged to open this infrastructure to potential competitors on the retail side, right? So we assess this in a policy project first, and then in a paper that will be published soon in the Journal of European Economic Association. And we show that this design not only reached the goal of building up the infrastructure in rural areas, which was the market failure that this subsidy wanted to address, but because of this open access obligation, they even increased competition in those markets that were subsidized compared to markets that were not subsidized, because they created competition through this obligation, right? So this is an example, and of course in this market it may be easier than in other markets, but I think that is a principle that policymakers should have in mind. Design the policy in a way that the allocation mechanism is efficient and so lead to competition for the market, and have obligation that maintain competition in the market once the market is established.
Okay, just to follow on, to understand better your vision, which sounds very convincing and appealing. Just to mature my understanding of things. So if we have markets where competition is global, and if Europe has interest in being present in those markets, is this situation possible, or this would be too kind of policy geopolitical?
I mean, this is surely an area that will be crucial, right? So I think
so let's assume
we will need industrial policy in areas. Oh, let me start again.
No, Tomaso. I'm just assuming that that there are markets where the presence of European companies is necessary on the global digital, let's say, race or whatever. Assuming that this is correct, it is an empirical question. But if such markets exist, do you say that the only successful way to achieve the necessary scale is to simultaneously develop, improve competition, but also sustainability, openness, and all other values? Is it the most efficient way, or it's the only way which we as Europe, being underpinned by these values, can afford to ourselves to do?
I think that that should be the European way. Of course, I mean, so especially industrial policy can try to achieve these other goals: sustainability, security of supply, digitization, and so on. So these are goals that are democratically chosen by politicians, and that we might think they are very important, and for these goals, we might want to have support. So by the state, we might see that there are market failures. We know that the market will not achieve these goals. So there is a good ground for asking the state to intervene, right? So yes, I think that that should be reached with industrial policy, but then design the industrial policy in a way that is effective, competition friendly, efficient, right? So if your question is, should we also use competition policy to reach this goal? My answer is, I'm not completely sure, right? So, but of course, a competition policy and these other policies that could be industrial policy or climate policy should talk to each other, right? So, and what I think is very important is that one manages to have all these policy areas talk to each other and to have great transparency, right? I still think that competition policy should mostly be focusing on competition. So I still think in this logic that for each objective there is an instrument, right? An instrument could not be used to reach several objectives. But I understand that sometimes a policymakers or a society has several objectives that the society wants to reach simultaneously. But then one should think of complementary instruments, each of which help reaching some of the objectives, and then they come together, and then there is a democratic process to decide if there is a conflict with which objective should be prioritized. And again, so I think that already now sometimes European competition policy or merger control is not super transparent on this. So you know that in merger control, for instance, the decision is not made by DG Com, it's made by the Commission, right? And we had two cases last year that were very controversial: a merger in telecom and a merger in airlines, right? Where from the competition perspective, actually it was clear that both mergers should have been blocked, right? But then they were not blocked, and it was not really clear why, and probably the reason was that there were some other objectives that the Commission wanted to reach. I don't want to discuss whether these objectives were the right objective or not, right? In those cases, I think they were not. But and then one would have liked to have an open and transparent process where the Commission says, okay, look, for competition, this merger is really bad, but for sustainability, we think that is very good, and then we have to balance the two things, right? And then it's an open process. Citizens will be able to understand who made the decision and for which reason, and then the democratic process is really working, right? And I think we would need a bit more of this, but this requests policymakers to be very transparent and very upfront, which they mostly don't like to, right? But I think it will be very, very important to have this become, so this institutional design and clearness to be much more transparent in the future.
And do you are you aware of any jurisdiction, any country in the world which can be used as maybe it is underexplored and goes beyond our below our radars, which can be used as a kind of as a solid example where this harmonious coexistence of two or more public policies yield.
Uh, no, because that is the ideal state that we want to reach. I mean, I was positively impressed by this approach of the Biden administration that really tried to put competition in the center, and then, you know, very openly said we want to use our policy tools to reach some specific objectives, and we always think about competition as a central force, so we have to think which implication this has on competition. So that I think that could be something that Europe is doing more in the future. I mean, we are still not there because, so one of the wonderful things of competition policy is that since the Treaty of Rome, the member state delegated to Europe a lot of power to think about competition. There is a lot of coordination, and it was wonderful because that led to the birth of a lot of sorry, National Competition Authority, the ECN, and that was a process that I think was very useful to improve the competition policy framework that we have nowadays. But we don't have it in other areas. I mean, in industrial policy, one of the huge issues we have in Europe is that everybody's doing what he wants. And this lack of coordination is extremely inefficient, I think, because the challenges that we are facing are very global. And the response, also, if you want strategic response to what other big players in the geopolitical sphere are doing, cannot be done by France and Germany and Italy and the UK, each in its way. So I think that it would be really important that Europe develop a European industrial policy. There are already some tools that are there. So the IPCEI are there. Is a way of coordinating. It's still money from the member states, but is a coordination on strategically important sectors that are vital for resilience, that are fundamental for many value chains. So it's really strategically chosen. So it's strategic industrial policy, coordinated at the EU level, and made based on the principle of the state aid control, that is, yes, let's do industrial policy in a way that is not distorting competition too much, right? In this balancing approach, where you have market failure that you want to address, and at the same time you try to reduce the distortion to competition, right? So that is what I think it should be the way to go. But honestly, I see it's very pessimistically, I must say, because of the political situation in Europe. When I see the last election in most member states, the parties that are coming to power, and are not surely those who would like to have more Europe than less Europe, right? So on the contrary, right? So, and I still have the hope that this commission really sees the challenges that they are facing, and the wake-up call that a Draghi report is putting on the table is taken seriously, and then Europe together come to a joint solution. But yeah, I'm not sure where we will do it, and if we don't do it, then I think we will have problems.
I think it's hard to develop further on this specific point because I fully resonate, my understanding of things fully resonate, and you have articulated it in a very accurate way. I fully subscribe to this last point. Speaking of Mario Draghi and Enrico Letta reports, what do you think about the genre itself, first of all, and about too, if you can comment upon these large pieces together, or maybe selecting some specific issues of each of them or any of them?
So I think both reports come in a moment where everybody finally agreed that there is an issue that we want to address. So I found a good step from the European institution to say, let's try to understand what the problem is. And I think both reports provides interesting facts that are pretty accurate about the issues that Europe is facing. So I do think that Europe is facing a competitiveness problem, not everywhere, but in some sectors. And these are sectors that unfortunately are really fundamental because they are up in the value chain and have implication for many other sectors, right? So in digital, I'm not just talking about platforms. I mean, Europe is not existent, but so semiconductors, batteries, so the new digital infrastructure that is so fundamental for so many products up in the value chains, Europe has a competitiveness problem. I mean, this will be exacerbated with the evolution of technology, artificial intelligence also there. So Europe is not completely lost, but is not really part of the value chain. So the analysis of both report is cruel, but I think is accurate. So we have a problem we have to address, right? And I think in both reports there are some solutions that I would totally agree with. And so I think that the main problem of European competitiveness is that we didn't manage to complete the internal market, right? Not even an internal market, not only the internal market for goods and services, much more so for services than for goods, but also we didn't manage to complete the capital market union, the banking union, so that the support for the investment. So first of all, it's difficult to create the goods and services at the European level, and then the investment for the firms, it's difficult for some firms to scale up because they don't get an easy access to the capital market as they might have either in the US, where the capital markets was completely different, with a large presence of risk-loving venture capital, or in China, where the state provides the money for scaling up, right? So this has not much to do with competition. This has to do with the fact that the member states do not manage to complete this internal market, harmonize regulation, laws, rules, because everybody is sticking to their own rules because they think that they are better or because it's too difficult, right? So I think that will be, and both reports make this very clear. And I think that that is something that should be addressed probably first, but it's so difficult that maybe it will not come. The other thing that it comes more from the Draghi report, where I think that he is right, is also something that I mentioned before. So if we decide that the state should step in, supporting private investment, so Draghi also said, so that the big chunk should be private investment, and we should create the condition for private investment to come to the market, right? But if we want then to do complement this with public investment, then we should coordinate this public investment at the European level. Also later talk about a European fund and so on. So that is also something that I think many economists like me would say it makes a lot of sense, yeah, but politically it's not easy, right? Because it's not easy, especially for countries that have the means to do things, to say, instead of just doing giving this support to my firms, I put the money in a European fund and I will have all European firms. I mean, I know this because I live in Germany. I'm Italian and I live in Germany, right? So, I mean, so if you look at, for instance, state aid expenditures in the last decades, half of European state aid expenditures come from Germany, right? So they have the money, they spend the money, right? So, and it's difficult to tell a German politician, you should not spend the money only for German firms, but also to support a European project, right? So, again, so I think one would need politicians with visions to do that, and a lot of courage. I don't see many of these around. I mean, Draghi was one of these in the past, a very European person, right? So let's see what happened. I mean, people should understand that there is a lot to win. There are a lot of synergies that can be created by working together. And again, the IPCI, which is surely not a perfect tool, but is a tool that I think convinced many people, and maybe building on things that have been work and trying to make them work better could be a way to go.
Again, that's very insightful and resonates very, very, very much with how I would intuitively sense these issues. Speaking of another regulatory attempt, which is much closer to competition policy than these broader societal challenges and opportunities, Digital Markets Act. What do you think about this entire? You mentioned the necessity or the inevitability or the objective preconditions for its adoption, but how big is the potential? And also a concurrent question. You don't like many questions, but just to make your answer more detailed on this specific, just to avoid duplication, so to say. Presuming that the DMA allows greater discretion, not many people would disagree, but if you can select in specific cases, or if you interpret wider specific obligations or instances of non-compliance with them, so you can create competition. That's a more proactive competition policy than purely responsive to an action. So it's more like merger control than 101 and 102, even if it's much more similar in terms of theory of harm to 102. Do you think this is, I wouldn't ask if it's legitimate policy, proactive competition creation, but in terms of feasibility, is there any kind of algorithm how you can do it, or it's kind of learning, it's purely experimental, and 10 different economists would have 10 different solutions about what should be more prioritized for, even if you talk about the strategic tailoring of competition in digital markets, or even tailoring digital markets themselves?
You make difficult questions, Oles. So
let's start with the last one.
Yeah, let's start with the last one, because there is a connection, I think, to how we enforce competition policy. And the connection is remedies. So I was talking to the former member of the Monopolies Commission, Jürgen Kühling, and the new member of the Monopolies Commission that you know well, Ruprecht Potzun. Over the weekend, we met and we were talking about the Google case in the US and thinking about so the monopolization case, right? So and the big question will be now, which remedies do we need to solve this problem, right? If you want, it's a bit of a market design issue. So which intervention do we need to make this market that has failed, so create a dominant position that has been then abused, to return to be more competitive, right? So, and then one can think about, is it more a structural remedy, a separation, which kind of behavioral remedies, and it's not easy, but I think it's doable, and I think that that is a venue that also the DMA could go, and there I see also this overlap between the American way of still, I mean, sticking to antitrust, but then maybe in comparison to Europe being more open to a broader set of remedies, also structural remedies, which are a bit more a way of changing how markets work, more than behavioral remedy, if you want, that in Europe is something that we don't like to do. Or the regulatory approach that Europe now has taken. So how much overlap between the two is there? So are the remedies that we will propose in the US partially overlapping with ideas that are entailed in the DMA, right? So in that sense, I think that sure, a regulation is there in general to create competition in a market where competition is missing, and in that sense, I think it's legitimate and possible to use this regulatory tool to make markets work better. Yeah, so that would be my general answer to the use of regulatory tools like the DMA to shape markets. So I think it's possible. One has to think carefully how to do that. And the other question is whether the DMA will deliver, and whether an ex-ante approach is better than an ex-post approach. So I mentioned before, I think that we were at a point where the ex-post approach, especially in Europe, but also in the US, didn't work, right? So we had two choices, either to make the ex-post approach much more effective and then double down on the cases we do, trying harder to find very effective remedies, and that is what the US Americans are doing, or going for the regulatory approach, which is more the European tradition, if you want. And I really hope that it will work, but it's also not easy, because regulation is really a tricky animal. I mean, regulation is very often might be very good on paper, but is very difficult to design. Now we have designed it, but it's even more difficult to enforce it. And this is particularly true for markets that are relatively new, where we still have to understand a lot. Market where the imbalance of resources and power is huge, like in digital, compare the commission to the gatekeepers in terms of resources and knowledge, right? So I'm struggling to think whether the commission is able to build in capacity, find the talents they need, the expert they need to understand these very complex markets, the functioning of the products, being able to to assess the data, to assess whether the firms are really compliant or not. When on the other side you have these huge gatekeepers with the best tech people, the best economy, the best lawyers, right? So that is an issue. And then the other fear I have is comes back to actually where I started as an economist. It was the political economy of regulation, right? So and there I was very much influenced by the public choice theory and the political economy theory that says that sector regulators are very often captured by the firms that they regulate, which is something, I mean, capture maybe is too much, but it's something I observe now that as a member of the Monopolies Commission, we look at the regulated sector. Of course, the regulator has to go so much into the details of the industry they regulate that they have to talk with that company. They have to understand what they do. They get a lot of information that is completely private information, right? So, I mean, the connection between the regulators and the regulated company is much stronger in a regulated sector than the connection that you have between an antitrust authority and the economy, right? And that could also be problematic at the end. Still, I mean, I was a supporter of the DMA. I still think it can work, and I still think it should be enforced really very, very fiercely. And when I see how big tech reacted this compliance workshop, I was really not pleased. But I found good that the Commission was pushing back. And I do hope that the new Commission will manage to have a team, a dedicated team that enforce these rules in a very effective way.
I'm tempted to ask a follow-on question. Let me try densely, because it goes in line with what you have said, but just for clarification. Again, you as an academic, as a thinker, as relying on data and on empirical information and then on modeling, etc. Assuming that you have a catalog of as a commission, as the DMA team, you have a catalog of different options to use as a stick, encouraging the gatekeepers to comply. And you communicate via this informal means within this different types of regulatory dialogue, setting up the parameters of what precisely you want from them in order to reach a more amicable solution rather than go to litigation as a last resort or as a kind of more rivalrous option. Do you have to be guided as an enforcer, as a prudent, strategically thinking enforcer or regulator? Do you have to be guided by obligations per se, or you have to use potential instances of non-compliance with obligations as a tool to shape something else, going a little bit beyond the letter of obligations of Articles 5.7? And if the answer is potentially or hypothetically yes, is it something measurable, definable, even in principle? I don't ask you to define it, but is it something? Is it a legitimate consideration, or it's purely utopical, kind of megalomaniac idea?
I mean, I would be already very happy if we would manage to have compliance with the obligation that we already have, right? So, I mean, that would be great, right? So, of course, I have the fear that that will not happen. I have the fear that will not happen because we have already seen in the past in competition policy how these firms actually try to not to comply with remedies or with promises they have made, right? So I think they will try to do it. Again, extrapolating from other industries, to make firms compliant with the set rules is not always easy. So one has to find a way of reacting if they are not compliant. So, but I have no recipe for that, right? I mean, there are so many steps, right? So even find out that they are not compliant is challenging, right? Again, so here my hope is that there are so many actors in the economy that are affected by the behavior of these firms that these actors will help the regulator to find out whether they are compliant or not, right? Which is the only way out, because truly hoping that the Commission is able to create a bureaucracy, if you want, that is so technically skilled to go out and test based on data what these firms are really doing is, I mean, it's, I have no hope, right? So, so again, I think this is a bit too much looking into the future. I think we should go step by step, be very hands-on, and also there try to evaluate as much as we can regularly. Try to have as many people on board as possible, as many experts on board as possible from civil society, from the market, that help essentially the regulator to protect the goal that is the welfare of everybody against maybe the particular interests of the regulated firms. And then staying on the piece, so and try to improve where we see that it doesn't work. The experience in the past tells that it takes very long. So if you look at the telecom sector, that is where maybe we have the best working regulation. It took decades to find the right tools, to find the way. And still, I mean, regulation was not perfect, right? But I mean, it helped. It helped to make markets become more competitive, to liberalize them, to have competition in the part of the market where you can have competition. So, I mean, there is hope, but one should know that regulation takes a long time.
Thank you very much for this answer. Last question, I'm mindful of time. Your experience in German Monopolies Commission.
So it's 2 years now. So maybe very short. The German Monopolies Commission is a very unique institution. Is we are expert for the independent expert for the government and the legislator on all issues that have to do with competition and regulation. And the commission was founded 50 years ago, a bit as a control institution for a very powerful independent antitrust authority, which is the Bundeskartellamt. And it's very interdisciplinary in the sense that the commission has 5 members. So an economist, that is myself, a lawyer, that is an academic, that is Ruprecht Postun now, and then 3 practitioners. So you have this very special mix of knowledge that is economics meets law, which is not always the case. And then you have academics meets praxis, because we have these 3 practitioners that are CEO or working in firms or in the board of firms and bringing this experience. So it was until now super interesting. So what we do is very broad. So every 2 years we write a very big report on the state of competition. And the other year we write 4 specific reports, one for each of the regulated sectors. So telecom, energy, post, and railways, right? So my first year was the regulation year, and I was shocked because, of course, I mean, the amount of details, and therefore I was talking so much about regulation, that you need to know to understand regulation. So the technical details is huge. And on top of that, I mean, in my first year, I learned a lot from law because regulation is a law. So you have really to understand not only the wording, but also what is possible and what is not possible in terms of the law. So it was fascinating. I really love this job. I also think it's extremely important because, as I mentioned at the beginning, we see ourselves as the lobby for competition, right? So and I think competition is a principle that many people don't understand how crucial it is for the functioning of our democracy. And so that goes also back a bit to my reform view of what competition is. So it's not just a mechanism that allow the efficient allocation of resources. I think that is very important, and we should keep it in mind. But in the German tradition, competition is also a tool that limit power. And by limiting economic power, also limit political power. So competition as a crucial role, also as a tool to see that society, democratic society, works nicely. And again, so this is not something new, something that in the US is now discussed a lot in the discussion between Brandeisian versus the Chicago school. But if you look, that is the ordoliberal school in Germany from the post-war experience, Eucklen, Böhm. So I think that is something we should keep in mind, and therefore I think that the work of the Commission is so crucial because we constantly make the point, think that competition should be protected, make choices that are not distorting competition, and of course, I mean, as we discussed before, there are many other goals that democratic society wants to use, but always keep in mind that competition should be a principle that should be considered by making us all these other really relevant choices. So I think that is my bottom line of my experience with the Commission. And I
Amazing.
there.
That's excellent. That's a very rich experience, and I'm sure it will continue enriching all of us as well. The last question is traditional one, a recommendation to students.
Because I make this change in my career and I'm doing much more policy work now, so I teach much less than I used to teach when I was at 100% of my time being a professor. But I still, what I recommend always to the students is to invest as early as possible in tools. Of course, empirical tools, I think, is very important. So we have data and tell so many stories, and it's so important to understand what is going on. So statistical, econometric, machine learning. But also other tools, modeling tools, logic tools, because having tools allows you to look at problems, whatever they are. right? So if you know to analyze data, you can analyze data to say something about labor markets or competition or education. So, but you can do it in a serious way, and knowing what are the limitations and what are the pros. And the other thing that I always say is try to be open-minded and to broaden the view. I mean, the world is complex. We learn a lot of stuff as economists, but that is not all. And especially with interdisciplinary discussion is very, very important, but very, very difficult, because people very soon learn to speak very different languages, and then it's difficult to communicate. But that is absolutely needed to address the problems that we face as a society.
Absolutely. Tomaso Duso, thank you very much indeed for this really informative conversation.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.